Yu is a marine biologist and the scientific director of Archipelagos Institute of Marine Conservation in Greece. Based permanently in the Aegean Islands since 2000, she leads the multidisciplinary scientific research of Archipelagos Institute, linking marine research with local communities and various stakeholder groups at a local, national, and international level. Her main interests cover fisheries research and co-management, conservation of marine protected habitats, and marine mammal research with a focus on the Aegean Sea. Anastasia has been awarded the title of Greek Ambassador in the EU for Sustainable Fisheries. We're also honored to have with us Ms. Katerina Sokou, who is a non-resident senior fellow at the Future Europe Initiative of the Atlantic Council and in Washington, D.C., and Washington, D.C. correspondent for Sky TV, the Greek daily newspaper Kathimerini, where she's also a columnist. Katerina studied history, first-class honors at the University of Ioannina and holds postgraduate degrees in international studies from the University of Warwick and in journalism from Columbia University, where she was Knight Bagehot Fellow in Economics and Business Journalism. She started her career as a financial reporter at Tovima, covering Greece and Eurozone, and was international financial news editor at Kathimerini during the global financial crisis. She has covered extensively the Greek financial crisis from Athens and Washington, D.C., providing commentary for news media in the US and Europe. Katerina is a PhD candidate at the University of Piraeus and is currently working on 2 Atlantic Council reports on US-Greece energy cooperation and the security implications of climate change in the Mediterranean. As you can tell, we have the right people for the right panel from the different sides of the spectrum and from different sides of the spectrum, not necessarily opposed in any way, shape, or form. Anastasia, the floor is all yours, and welcome to both of you. And excuse my not very formal presentation, but I feel that you're both good friends of the Institute and of myself. So welcome once again.
Thank you very much, Petro. Hello to all from the stormy Aegean. It's a pleasure to connect with you from this very remote part of Greece. As Petro said, I have spent the last 20 odd years here in the Eastern Aegean Sea, in the Mediterranean. And leading a field organization means that we are 24/7 throughout the year, winter and summer, in the field, in the Aegean, monitoring some very fascinating aspects of its biodiversity, but also observing a very worrying increase of the threats and a very worrying inactivity from the national and EU authorities, which puts all the biodiversity at stake. Before I start, I wanted to share what gives us hope here and what the drives us to keep going is that, especially after the Greek crisis and the COVID crisis now and all the different difficulties that the island and coastal communities are facing, what gives us hope is that the people in Greece that deal with the environment and not the city conservationists, but mainly the fishermen, the farmers, people who are in everyday contact with the environment, realize day by day that if they do take action by their own initiative, there is hope, and there's a lot of hopeful action starting bottom up, and that's what we are here and supporting. Let me see how I can share my screen. 1 second. So I wanted to start by sharing my screen and sharing some images. Can you see my screen?
Yes, yes.
Great. So I want to start by sharing a video.
Is a video playing?
Can you see?
No, we can't see it. It's not playing.
Oh, I'm sorry. So don't worry, I will share that with you so you can enjoy some beautiful images of the Aegean later. I hope you can see my screen now.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So going back to where we are and what we do, as the Institute of Marine Conservation at Archipelagos, we are a Greek nonprofit NGO. We are comprised by an international team of researchers and scientists and journalists and artists and professionals of different fields, all joining forces to protect the environment. So the last 24 years, we're working very hard to defend wildlife, the unique biodiversity of the Northeast Mediterranean, combining research, education, awareness raising, and conservation actions. So if I can explain it more simply, we're working at sea to monitor marine mammals, coastal ecosystems, mapping habitats, analyzing the pollution, and last but not least, working very closely with the local communities. Coming to an area anywhere in the world to work for conservation, to work for the environment, it's very expected that the locals will look at you with a suspicion. What are you doing? Why are you here? Why are you telling them what to do? It takes a lot of time to gain trust, and it took us over a decade to do so. So now I think that's our bigger achievement. We have managed to gain the trust of the locals to work together for conservation initiatives, and at the same time, we have the pleasure of working with students from all over the world. In 24 years, we have hosted over 18,000 students from 43 countries, aiming to inspire the new generation of conservationists. Right now, in the winter, we are in this little COVID-free bubble with about 60 students from many parts of the world, and we work year-round with young people who come to gain experience and learn from our projects and use their energy, their smart ideas, and their hard work to promote our conservation goals. So Archipelagos is in the middle of nowhere. Right now, I'm on an island with 800 inhabitants, but we work with many international organizations and with many universities around the world who are our key scientific partners. And as I said, we're based on the Eastern Aegean, very close to the coast of Turkey. And on a normal year, non-COVID year, we would travel also to the Eastern and Central Mediterranean, and frequently we survey up to the coast of Libya. So I talk about research, I talk about the Aegean, and many people have different perspectives of what is in the Aegean. What is it, the value here? Is it hydrocarbons? Is it the new fashion of covering the islands with wind farms, or is it wildlife? Well, if you ask me, I will tell you about wildlife. This area of the Mediterranean, by chance, not because we protect it, happens to be one of the most important remaining biodiversity hotspots in the area. In the picture on the left, you can see one of the common dolphins. Common was called by Aristotle. Now it's almost extinct from the whole of the Mediterranean. Every aspect, you look at the sharks in the deeper waters, the falcons that you can see in the picture that migrate from Madagascar every spring to nest on the small islands of the Aegean. Monk seals, dolphins, sperm whales, rhesus dolphins is all the beauty that we record and monitor. And we never forget that these endangered and protected species are protected in paper, not in practice, and they survive until today just by chance. In Greece, we don't enforce any protection. And to prove the obvious, on the bottom left, you see a picture of a poor turtle, which is in Zakynthos Marine Park, probably what could be called the worst marine park in the world. And the poor turtle is trying to lay eggs in between umbrellas and sunbeds in an area where none of these should ever be allowed to exist. So a lot of damage, a lot of stress, and a lot of concern on whether we will be able to protect this wildlife before it's too late. I mean, it will be a real pity in a day and age that everyone talks today about the environment, but normally they speak about the environment as if it's poetry or something theoretical, not something practical. And for us, it will be a real pity if we lose this biodiversity here in Greece, not 100 years ago when we didn't know, but now when so much knowledge is around. Greece is not an easy area to work in for conservation because it has a very large coastline, over 18,000 kilometers, has a large fishing fleet, over 16,000 vessels, dense traffic, a small territorial zone of only 6 miles, which is not well monitored. We don't have good strategies for conservation. And most importantly, there's a lack of cooperation between Greece and Turkey for protecting a shared sea. If there is a big shipping accident, there's no cooperation. There is no cooperation for fisheries and so many other issues that make conservation so difficult. In the Aegean, one of the most important activities is fisheries. And on one side, we have the small-scale fisheries, which have survived here for, have existed for over 3,500 years. We have evidence that fishermen have been catching the same species. Today, that not only the artisanal fishermen have to address with the industrial fishing, but also with species that are changing. For the last 3,500 years, fishermen have been catching the same catch. Now, new species, invasive species, and alien species are expanding because of human activity, causing an increased problem. However, in Greece, we have extensive destructive fishing, IUU fisheries, what is commonly called. Sadly, we still have dynamite fishing going on because of the tolerance of the national authorities, whereas fishermen devise so many different ways to escape control, fish illegally, have a good catch today, and probably destroying the future of the children as fishermen tomorrow. So in this effort to combat illegal fisheries, something that we've been relying on is participation of the people. Fishermen, islanders, people living in coastal regions, even visitors in the summer months report to us unofficially illegal fishing activities that they see, and we try unofficially to inform the authorities so that they can take action much faster than if the official way is sometimes taken. When we say destructive fisheries, we can imagine emptying of the sea from fish, but what is even more important is the destruction of the forest of the seas. This is why one of our key actions, apart from fisheries research, has to do with the protection of seagrass meadows. The Posidonia seagrass meadows are the forest of the seas here in the Mediterranean. They regulate productivity. They are a key habitat for over 1,300 species. And something that people don't realize is that they absorb more than 35 times more carbon than the tropical rainforest, which means that they are an invaluable ally to address the effects of climate change. However, they have a very slow growth rate. So when illegal trawling or other human activities destroy them, they have they require centuries to recover. So a lot of the work that we do on board the boats, mapping in the sea, monitoring the oxygen levels, then the carbon they absorb, replanting seagrass is a key effort and a key target for us in archipelagos to protect the forest of our seas. And I need to say that for the Posidonia seagrass meadows and the seagrass meadows in general, the legislation exists for the protection. So if in Greece we enforced existing legislation, we would be protecting them, but sadly we don't. A more difficult challenge, however, has to do with the conservation of coralligenous habitats. Coralligenous habitats are what we frequently call the best kept secret of the Mediterranean. Most people don't even know they exist. They are found in deep waters in the Mesophotic zone between 50 and 270 meters depth. And here in the Aegean, they have been aged to exceed over 7,000 years of age. So this highly diverse and beautiful and important in terms of productivity coralligenous reefs face daily the danger of irreversible destruction by illegal trawling. It should be illegal according to international law, but Greece has not mapped where these habitats exist. So if you come tomorrow with your trawler and destroy a 7,000-year-old habitat, you will probably be legal, or you will be legal, because the government has not done its job to protect them and to map them and enforce no trawling zones. So we had to take some decisions. Us in Greece and other NGOs from a Mediterranean Alliance, we have formed. What do? Do we take the governments to court and, for not fulfilling our obligations, or do we map for free and then force them to accept our maps? We realized by taking the legal pathway, we would spend about 10 years until real action was taken. So we have invested on the research vessel, on the equipment, on the staff, and we are out at sea a large part of the year recording and monitoring the coralligenous habitats. And the pictures are from the last expedition. And on the top, you can see a forest of black corals that we discovered at 100 meters depth, which was in an area where it is legal to trawl and therefore cause destruction irreversibly to these habitats. I had some videos to show you, but for some reason they don't play, so I will share them with you if you want to watch them later. But closing about the corals, I need to emphasize that this is our key action and conservation effort, not only for us here in Greece, but also with NGOs in Italy, Spain, and France. We're joining forces to map as fast as we can with the aim to enforce existing legislation and protect them. So apart from the beauties and the amazing biodiversity of the deep waters, we cannot ignore that the Aegean Sea is one of the most important remaining hotspots for biodiversity for marine mammals in the Mediterranean and Europe. The population we monitor of 4 dolphin species, of 2 whale species, and the highly endangered Mediterranean monk seal. It's a mixed feeling. It's a huge fortune that we have these animals still surviving in our seas, even though we don't enforce any measures for the conservation. But on the other side, it's a big responsibility. There is no conservation applied. We're losing them year by year. In the right, you can see the Mediterranean monk seal. About 600 are estimated to survive globally. And only in Greece, only last year, we had 19 recorded deaths or killings of Mediterranean monk seals. The good news is that there is still diversity. This is I'm sharing with you the tracks of the last 77 days at sea, where we covered almost 4,500 miles. And it's hopeful. 124 sightings in 77 days of 4 dolphin species, sperm whales with many young, beaked whales, and monk seals. So life is still here. It still survives, even though we don't protect it. The challenge is whether we will be able to protect them efficiently before it's too late. In the pictures on the top left, you can see a sperm whale preparing for its dive. On the bottom is a very rare photo of a beaked whale, a Cuvier's beaked whale, a small size whale, about 8-9 meters long, that is very rarely seen, but we are monitoring them on the same location for over 20 years. And on the right is also the quite unknown rhesus dolphins. And on top you can see our research boat, one of our research boats for the marine mammals. So diversity, seagrass, corallogen, mammals, and so much more marine life. And then we start analyzing for plastic and microplastic pollution. Sometimes microplastics have become such a new fashionable word, and we don't realize that it is our rubbish that breaks down in the sea and ends up in our plate and in our ecosystem. After analyzing over 20,000 samples of fish, invertebrates, seawater, etc., the results are, to say the least, alarming. Microplastic fibers and plastic debris are found in all levels of the ecosystems. Here you can see some of our labs in the island of Lipsea that we have. We are analyzing for microplastics. On the top left is a turtle that is drifting between rubbish, and on the right, if you can see in this little picture, there is what we found on the stomach of one dead turtle, one of the many dead turtles we dissect, and we found 54 different plastics or pieces of plastic debris, and it was everything: pieces of plastic bags, rubbish bags, biscuit wrappers, balloons, everything that shouldn't be in the sea was in the stomach of this poor animal. So it's really alarming on the impact of the species and the habitats. And I just want to share with you, you're the first to see the results from the analysis of the last month. It was published yesterday in these infographics. In 192 blades of seagrass, we found over 2,600 fragments and pieces of plastic. In 87 sea urchins, we found 1,734 pieces of plastic. In 189 fish, we found over 5,500 fibers and fragments of plastic. It's really alarming that 100% of the samples contain plastic. And this all comes from the numerous illegal rubbish pits that operate in the Greek islands. So when we hear of these campaigns that discuss that we should reduce our bottle and our straw and everything else, which I do, and I hope you all do, and you know, it's obviously common sense to reduce our daily plastic footprint, we should realize it is not enough. The sources of pollution doesn't rely only on the citizens. We have to do our part, but we have to demand that national authorities deal with the problem of plastics. This is one of the numerous illegal rubbish pits. Some of them are just open, so the wind disperses the plastics around to the sea, not only on small islands, but also on bigger popular islands like Santorini and Mykonos. They have an unacceptable management of rubbish in the corner of the island that is not visible to tourists. And what is even more alarming is, when I was quite shocked by it, is to see islands like Santorini, as I mentioned earlier. You can see on the bottom some of the nice waste management in Santorini. What do they do? Instead of dealing with the problem, they put a poster up saying plastic-free Santorini, trying to expect that the visitors are stupid and they don't realize the problem. So what I need to say is that the problem is really bad. The extent of pollution is really bad. And by playing and hiding and covering up the problem, it's going to be even a more heavy heritage for the future generations on the accumulation of plastic pollution that we now found from the surface waters to 1,000 meters depth, from the coast near Athens to the islets that are uninhabited. So on one side, we have the risk and the threat of plastic and plastic pollution. But on the other side, we live in a country where sadly there is extensive uncontrolled use of real ammunition in environmental sensitive areas. These two are the islands that you see in the picture is a very small island called Anidro. It's north of Patmos Island. Archipelagos Institute, together with the community of the region, made it into a wildlife refuge, permanent wildlife refuge back in 2004. And a year later, we realized that it's going to be bombed as a training ground for the Greek army, even though it's a protected site, even though it's a Natura 2000 site, and even though it was late September, a time of the year where the little falcons you can see on the left picture, they have formed one of the most important breeding colonies in the Mediterranean. The Eleonora falcons come all the way from Madagascar with a 6-week flight every spring to breed on uninhabited islands, one of which the Greek army was planning to bomb. Archipelagos Institute took this case to, it was difficult without social media, with very limited media, and the normal media did not want to bring attention to such a topic. At the time, thankfully, with the intervention of us and many scientists around the world, we blocked it within 2 days. And in cooperation with a research team from Yale University, we analyzed the substances that are released to the environment after every explosion of military ammunition in natural habitats. So we have won the fight of and have created a legal precedent for when the army, the armed forces are trying to bomb an island or an islet, but we are still have failed to address the problem of when the armed forces are practicing using real ammunition by the sea, which means explosion over protected habitats, over areas where there are very rich fish stocks that are causing a damage to the habitats, to the fish stocks, to the public health, and release toxic substances to the natural environment. Wrapping up the risks, I want to share with you something equally alarming. The red routes in the image is 24 hours in the Aegean, is the uncontrolled boat traffic of the boats that are in the area, and which means that we are extremely fortunate. As you can see in the image, there's no corner, there's no bit in the Aegean that boats don't pass. Over 50% of these boats have flags of convenience, meaning they're high-risk boats. We've had accidents like the ones you see on the right, but no major accident yet. However, this doesn't mean that we're going to be fortunate forever. We are trying to urge the national authorities realize that the cost of dealing with the consequences of a major accident are much, much more than the cost of investing to a prevention mechanism. So I hope it was not depressing, but we need to be realistic on the threats that are facing every day this unique biodiversity of this corner of the Mediterranean. And the obligation that we all share, it's not Archipelagos' job. I think we all share, it's an international heritage that we all are obliged and have the responsibility to protect before it's too late. So thank you very much for your attention, and I'm happy to hear of any questions you may have.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll have the questions immediately afterwards. As always, the presentations are breathtaking and very incredible. We talk about. I started out by saying that George Danis constantly talks about citizenship and democracy, and I think this is just as relevant to citizenship as anything, you know, the work that you're doing there. So I think it's pretty incredible. So, Ms. Katerina Soku, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and thank you, Anastasia. That was a very insightful presentation. I think that it's a pleasure for me to be rejoining you, and I think this interdisciplinary seminar is the right way to approach the Eastern Mediterranean. I am pleased that it has expanded to be covering so many different topics on diplomacy and security, and that the environmental concerns in particular feature prominently in it. Just today, we're publishing at the Atlantic Council an article that that is part of a larger report that is making the argument that we should be treating the Mediterranean like the center of the world again, because as far as climate change is concerned, Europe's security depends on it. Now I'm making the, and I will go through the argument with you because I think it's important on security level as well as on an environmental level to understand the challenges that climate change presents for our region or for our part of the world, and that it expands beyond our part of the world. Now, the Mediterranean for millennia has been facilitated trade and exchanges, and thanks to this amazing biodiversity that Anastasia talked about, it forced the land around it into a varied yet distinct region. And the coastal environment around the Mediterranean has served as the common denominator for the diverse peoples in the area and has fed the rise of some of the world's most consequential civilizations. Now, today, the Mediterranean is facing these rising temperatures and tides, and these present an existential test that also has socioeconomic and geopolitical implications for the regions. It is the crossroads and has always been the crossroads of Europe, Africa, and Asia. How it faces these challenges, extra challenges that climate change presents, it will have consequences not only for the countries and the peoples of the region, but also beyond its source. Now, how the Mediterranean nations in particular respond to the devastating effects of climate change, what kind of actions they take and how they may aggravate the already existing geopolitical tensions in the region, how they may strain their country level stability, how they may increase the security threats of the regions. These are issues that need to be addressed. Similarly, on the European Union level, how the EU addresses issues of civil protection, international cooperation, energy and water availability, and the migration flows, it will determine not only the peace and security of the Eastern Mediterranean as a separate neighborhood, but also its own future. And this requires, we are arguing, a regional approach to address and protect this vulnerable coastal ecosystem. Now, to give you a few facts about how much the Eastern Mediterranean in particular is being threatened. Coastal ecosystems are particularly vulnerable to climate change because of global warming, because of sea level rise, but also because of the increased intensity and frequency of major weather events that are predicted to hit the coastal nations particularly hard. In the Eastern Mediterranean and the Mediterranean as a whole, high-resolution climate simulations predict that temperature increases will severely affect the whole of the Mediterranean during this century. Now, the Mediterranean has been warming 20% faster than the global average already, and the area's temperature is projected to rise 2.2 degrees Celsius by 2040. This, in turn, will reduce precipitation by at least 10 to 15% and up to 30% in Southern Europe. Similarly, demand for water is projected to double, or according to some scenario, to even triple by 2050, while coastal zones in particular will face flooding, erosion, desalination of river deltas and aquifers. Now, the socioeconomic implications of all these are significant, as the coastal economy has always been and still is of primary economic importance for many Mediterranean countries. The strain of global warming on energy and food systems in particular is projected to increase the risk of domestic instability. Similarly, the projected population growth will add to migration pressures and in turn to geopolitical tensions. These dangers have also been highlighted. Last year, it was published the first national intelligence estimate on climate change in the United States. There, the National Intelligence Council warns that no country will be spared from the challenges directly related to climate change. Now, environmentalists have also and always been warning that the risks are systemic in nature, noting that natural disasters caused by climate change are upending lives the world over, since natural disasters have longer-term consequences for nature, for, of course, biodiversity that Anastasia referred and analyzed, and but also societies and economies. Addressing these systemic challenges need to top the national security considerations of all countries. Environmentalists note that the priority of multilateral cooperation should focus not only on the national goals of carbon neutrality that we share within the process of the Paris Accord, but also in rethinking our global supply chains, our food systems, our economic interdependencies. And I found especially interesting an argument and a quote of Olivia Lazard, who's a visiting scholar at Carnegie Europe and has been making her proposals for how the EU should deal with this. She calls for an approach that exceeds the national boundaries to account for a new reality that will be defined by geography and climate more than any time in the modern historical experience. And although the risks of global climate change cannot be addressed by any country alone, they do exacerbate a number of risks to national security interests that for the countries of the region are particularly important. So those risks also need to be assessed by its nation's intelligence community, pretty much as the US did on a global scale, including the potential of greater geopolitical tension if countries do not coordinate in their climate response, which may be a source of new geopolitical tension. And also, and importantly, the effects of the energy transition and its own geopolitical risks that it creates. Now, for the Mediterranean nations in particular, a regional and comprehensive approach to climate change, including the physical and economic effects, will help them determine and highlight the security challenges for the area. But also for the West, I would argue, not only the European Union, and I'll go back to that. Now, currently, there are, of course, important initiatives, including the UN Environment Programme Mediterranean Action Plan, that already provides a comprehensive assessment of the state of the environment and development in the region. And similarly, the Barcelona Convention adds a framework, a specific framework for climate action. All this is critically important, I'm making the argument at this Atlantic Council article, for Europe's security. To understand why, I suggest we revisit a 20th century French historian named Fernand Braudel. Some people refer to him as a geographist. He said that Europe's southern border is not the Mediterranean, but actually the Sahara Desert. Such a view of Europe encompasses areas that include North Africa, the Levant, and the Eastern Mediterranean. And if we go back to history and see the traditional, the way that the Mediterranean connected these cultures throughout history, we can understand his argument. Robert Kaplan, who's an author and a great geopolitical analyst, has also studied Braudel. And it was actually at the 2019 Delphi Economic Forum that he noted that, for a brief period during the Cold War, there was a brief moment in history that Western Europe was actually isolated from this larger geographic area of Eurasia, as the borders was closed to Eastern Europe, because of the Cold War. But nowadays, he argues that Europe is again besieged from all corners of the Mediterranean, and Russia. And in that sense, Europe is dissolving on the outside. It is back to traditional geography with all the instability that that brings, he argued. Now, for the EU, I think this means that it needs to adopt a systemic approach to climate mitigation and adaptation efforts that include the whole of the Mediterranean ecosystem, based on its own assessment that it should do on the security challenges that it faces. And by doing that, it would also play a stabilizing role in the Eastern Mediterranean, the Middle East and Africa, that would also help the region counterbalance the influence of other rising regional powers and of China. Our argument is that this assessment should also lead to an ambitious financing and technology assistance drive to support energy transition in a region that is still largely dependent on hydrocarbons, but with a massive potential in renewable energy. And there I identify some important role and high stakes for Greece in particular. Now, Greece is at the forefront of this struggle, one, because climate change is an existential threat for Greece's natural environment and its coastal economy, including its tourism. And as a frontier state of the European Union, it also bears the burden of protecting EU borders from irregular migration and terrorist threats. Now, for Greece, its potential resources and partners obviously are within the EU, but also extend beyond it. The country can and should build on its NATO membership to actively grow Europe's security-related climate response capabilities in the region, possibly in coordination with France or the United States. It can also draw on its traditional ties in the Eastern Mediterranean and beyond in the Middle East and the Gulf. It should expand those ties, including its trilateral partnerships, to address the effects of climate change through trade and investment. Indeed, as the previous panel that was very interesting and I was noted, Greece is leading the shift to renewable energy in the region and is planning electricity interconnectors that can bring the untapped green energy potential of the Eastern Mediterranean to Europe. Now, according to MEDEC, which is a network of Mediterranean experts on climate and environmental change, renewables are projected to triple by 2040 in the Mediterranean basin. And especially in its proactive scenario, they would account for about 70% of total installed capacity and more than 50% of electricity generation by 2040, leading to a drastic restructuring of the power generation infrastructure that would also allow for this green energy to be exported to Europe. And to that effect, the agreement that Dr. Tsakiris mentioned in the previous panel, signed between Greece and Egypt last November for an electricity interconnector between the two countries, could open, and of course the Euro-Asia interconnector as well, could open the European market to renewable energy for those nations that are particularly vulnerable to climate change and the disruption of the energy transition. Putting the climate crisis, our central argument, is at the center of foreign policy and national security, as the Biden administration is already doing, is the first step for the countries of the region and the European Union to put forward and coordinate policy responses and proposals to help mitigate the effects of climate change. The EU in particular, but the countries of the region as well, need a climate action plan that addresses the impact of climate change on the Mediterranean as the vulnerable and interdependent ecosystem that it is, while also accounting for its effects on migration. And we make the argument that focusing on the Mediterranean Sea and its multiple interdependencies has currency for the region, but certainly also beyond it. And given the physical, economic, and geopolitical stakes involved, protecting the crossroads of these three continents, we argue, may still define the direction of the world, of our world. Thank you.
Thank you. Great presentations. And you know, there are a couple of questions out there. I'm going to have Maria Muzahi take over and ask the questions. I do have one brief question for both of you, as one, talks on the ground sort of stuff, and then the other one is more of a policy orientation. I really appreciated how, Katerina, you brought in even the previous discussion points. And my only question before Maria takes over, I guess, has to do with the level of of balancing those energy needs that we have, and the whole fascination with renewables, and the actual need of sustainability in the same kind of a environment. I know it's a general question, but I'd like to hear from both your perspectives on the general question that this panel raises, or the topic raises here. So, Katerina, you can go first.
I can start, even though I think Anastasia is will have more to say on that, because she's studying biodiversity, and I actually had the question for her of exactly the same kind of premise. How would renewables and the specific targets that Greece has set that are very ambitious to include renewable energy into the mix, especially wind farms, how would that affect the Aegean as an even smaller ecosystem, right? Even more critical for Greece in that regard. More generally, I would just say that in my readings and in the analysis that I'm seeing, obviously the issue of licensing for such projects has a very specific way of being done in European Union countries that take into account environmental considerations. But also, I was listening the other day of the auction of licenses on the coastline of the US, and how that might have and is having in New York and New Jersey in particular for new wind farms is expected to be facing resistance from mostly interest groups in that case that include real estate developers at the coastline, but also fisheries. If I understand correctly, I was listening to this story on Bloomberg, so I don't know more about it than what I listened on the news as far as that is concerned. But I understand that there are processes that take into account, and the licensing takes into account where, or should be taking into account, where these wind farms are being developed. In the case of the Eastern Mediterranean, though, I have to say, and with the solar panels, it's more the vast potential of solar energy being developed in the Sahara Desert than anything that has to do with wind farms.
Great, thank you.
If I want, adding my point of view and experience on, because sustainability and green energy and how this is perceived to be carried out in Greece, we have to, we're very, very skeptical over the last couple of years, seeing the national plans and how turning to green energy is perceived here by the national authorities. Obviously, we are very pro-sustainable energy. Our stations here in Lipsi Island, for example, is powered only by solar. We have other areas use the wind energy, and it's really efficient, and it's very much cost efficient. Our investment pays off in 2 to 3 years, and we're totally independent and off the grid. So we've seen it work, and we share this knowledge with communities, with islanders, and this is something that should be done in a large scale in the Greek islands. However, the current policy inhibits companies, people, households, villages to turn to green energy and to small-scale application of renewable energy sources. And on the other hand, it's encouraging these large investments, these large planning that they have to cover Very important islands, which have important biodiversity and very important in terms of landscape. The plan is that they will be covered with very, very large wind farms, meaning we cover our islands with wind turbines, which through underwater cables are connected to the mainland, Athens and further, to cover the energy needs of the cities. The problem is that the basic motivation for using the islands and certain mountains in Greece is the free land. The investor will not have to buy the land, and this is not equivalent to what happens in other parts of Europe, where you see industrial scale wind farms installed near the cities because the cost for the investor is obviously closer to be nearby. Here, islands and mountains are granted for free, and that's why we see the monstrous and very alarming planning of these very big installations. For example, in 14 islands here in the Danis and the Cyclades, within Natura 2000 regions, there is a planning to install over 100 wind turbines. Each turbine is 198 meter high in islands where the average height does not surpass the 300 meters. So the energy produced will be per turbine about 2.5 megawatts, which is, as for example, the consumption of an island size of Sifnos. What I'm trying to say is that it's not for the island, it's for exporting the energy. So we're having this irreversible damage to the landscape. And imagine that for the specific installation and example I'm using, they need to construct 70 kilometers of a road network in hard to reach areas. They need to do extensive excavation, construct 14 single-use ports, disproportionate with the size of the islands in the remote areas, just to cover the unloading of the materials and the vehicles, etc. Imagine that on a small island the size of Lipsi, for example, they will need to have a truck with a lorry of 80 meters to carry the parts of the wind turbines that cannot be in pieces. So the mountains will need to be cemented with hundreds of thousands of cubic meters of cement. And according to their impact assessment, they have to excavate and bury 673 kilometers of cables and many, many other developmental interventions. So yes, of course, we are supporting renewable energy, but it can be done in different ways. It can be done with the interest of the environment, of being green, of reducing our carbon consumption, and of finding small-scale solutions that do not destroy the environment or the landscape. Or we can do the easy, good investment, good profit, good turnover solution, which is sadly planned for Greece. We live in a time when renewable energy applications of latest technology are incredible globally. There is great technologies, there's very, very efficient, low cost, that can be used in so many ways, and we have so many examples from all over the world. So I find it a paradox and a disaster that in Greece we insist on applying technologies that belong to the past, but bring high profit to certain large investors and contractors. The technology is here, the knowledge is here, and even the means are here. We're just looking at the Green Deal announcement from the EU and looking at it as an investment and not as a solution to protect the environment, the welfare of all children. And it will be a pity after so many thousands of years to cause an irreversible destruction to the islands, to the landscape, on something that we cannot bring back after 15 or 20 years.
Can I just ask, Anastasia, what about the biodiversity of this? What about the biodiversity risks of these projects that you're describing? Is there any risk there?
They're extreme because the islands are a very important area for the migration of birds. And obviously, the majority of the studies have been done in the plains of Denmark and the plains of other like Central European countries where they don't have this sort of migration. Here, we already record in the big wind parks, there's a big heat frequency of the wind turbines and the birds. But what I'm even more concerned that is not apart from the obvious killings is the change of the microclimate. This is something that people don't really consider. I don't know if you have noticed that in the Greek islands for thousands or hundreds of years, people were putting windmills even in areas where they didn't have production, just to have the mail rolling to make sure that the frost is destroyed. So they were aware that something, a windmill at the time was avoiding what we used to call pailletos and affecting the microclimate. This is common knowledge from the islanders. We know though that, imagine that if we cover an island with 15, 18, 25, depending on the island, large wind farms, there are inevitably going to be dramatic consequences to the microclimate. The turbulence caused by the turbines causes intense mixing of the gaseous masses and changes the temperature and the moisture of the ground. And here on the islands, we don't have a lot of rainwater, so the majority of the groundwater is filled by the frost, the ayazi, the water vapor that's coming from evaporation of the seawater at night. So we expect that not only the obvious wildlife will be dramatically affected, but we also have very worrying changes and consequences in the microclimate by the giant wind farms that are planned to be installed. I need to be clear though, we're not talking against renewables. We could use renewables in a small scale, covering the needs of each island without needing to put underwater cables with hundreds of kilometers around the islands to cover that. There are different ways to do it, and we should use the most sustainable approach to stop using fossil fuels and to turn to renewables, but not the way that the Greek government is currently planning on doing so.
Anastasia, I'm George Danis. Katerina, nice to see you both. Thank you very much for a beautiful presentation and educational process in both the climate, the waste, and the energy, all intertwined, and no one wants to miss or to lose the environment and in any way to produce energy for the future. And it is a problem that we are facing, the planet is facing. And so we really need to find ways to be able to produce sufficient energy to supply both present and future. And you mentioned about is plenty of renewable energy, Anastasia. Can you tell us what energy is that? I haven't heard anything that is abundant and clean and in a small scales.
Well, since we're talking about the Greek islands as an example, and we have islands inhabited by one, we have islands like Lipsi, where I'm today, inhabited by 800, and others by thousands, obviously. It is possible at a local scale to use solar energy, solar panels, to use small scale wind farms, or as is now in Patmos, use 2 wind farms in the corner of one island that is not damaging wildlife or the landscape, to cover the needs of each region. Our island should be independent energetically. It's absurd that we have to have underwater cables to connecting to the next and the next island in a place where we have sunlight 10 months a year. Today, I was in the station that's powered by solar panels. It's 5 days of clouds, and still we had 80% charge in our battery, and we could work normally in the laboratory. So it is possible, but we cannot, we have to find low, small scale island solutions for the small areas. And of course, this is different when we have to deal with Athens, when we have to deal with a big city in the mainland, where there are big areas of land. For example, Athens has all this land close to Sparta. That could be used better than using the islands to build the wind farm. So there are solutions.
We all agree, and we don't want to have it next door. It's like the migration. We all help, but we don't want to take them home. So as a society and a citizenship, we don't want to bring them to the country. So, and I'm not disagreeing with you, because we have the same problem in the island of Evia, southern Evia, and we have all kinds of wind turbines up in the mountains, and I'm not happy. No one is happy. And totally, the solar part is the same thing. Solar farms also impact the environment in some way or another. The problem or the process that I see is both in a government, inability and in actions in a total strategic transformation and transition of energy in some planning way that doesn't become a sort of a commercial kind of a business, and everybody start putting some things up, both the turbines or the solar and things like that. We need to really have some kind of a plan, a transition plan, to be able to move from the present to the future green energy. So that's where I feel that the environmental and the cleaning of the environment, or the waste that we dump in everywhere, including in the seas, in the plastics area, I think we as citizens bear a lot of the problem as well, or the responsibilities. And if you go to any store or any place, or even at the restaurants, they keep putting napkins down, and the next thing, those fly by the wind, especially in the islands, with the wind taking off and really polluting everything and everywhere. And then we have the same thing in the plastics. So we really, this is why both Professor Vavakas and I and have a podcast and talking about democracy and citizenship. The responsibility of the plastics cannot be eliminated unless the citizenship really takes charge and takes full responsibility, not to just start putting or allowing or accepting the packaging process of products that they produce, package and ship to us, or we purchase from the stores, that they have an enormous plastic size and plastic coverage and packaging that ends up either in the landfills or, unfortunately, in the environment and in the oceans. But obviously, working and focusing and doing what you're doing, and making sure that the rest of our citizenship understands that we are responsible for both environment, the climate, and the energy, for that matter.
If I may add to that, the other report we're doing at the Atlantic, it's on energy transition and bilateral energy cooperation. And we named it Squaring the Energy Transition Circle. just because it's so difficult to account for all the challenges that this period of energy transition presents to our societies and our economies and our geopolitical balance in the region, that we need to balance and have this discussion, as Mr. Danis is saying, as a society, as a polity, to reach the what the outcomes that we are hoping for our own countries, right? But also as part of a regional system. I think that if anything, climate change, and especially in the Mediterranean, exposes the risks for all of us having the effect of climate change, irrespective of the actions of a single country, right? Just because we're all interdependent in this ecosystem. So we have to treat it as such, and we need to treat energy transition as such. I know that the Greek government also has a plan to turn Greek islands into green, sustainable, autonomous places. But at the same time, as the previous panel was discussing, in order to make this transition to green energy and get away from hydrocarbons, while investing in interconnecting rather the electricity systems of the area, it is like a balancing act of what kind of priorities you set. And yeah, more discussion is needed on a societal level on that, and we need to understand the biodiversity risks as well as but also the actual needs of the system for stability, right? The electricity grid, as Dr. Tsakiris was saying in the previous panel.
Thank you so much for that. I believe that we have one more question. Let me see. How can countries in the Mediterranean coordinate when their interests are so diverse and in some cases mutually exclusive? And that could be for both of you.
Well, if I may just briefly take it, I think that their interests, if anything, the argument that we're making is that their interests, they'll be facing the same challenges, right? So as regards climate change, the challenge of losing your biodiversity affects everyone the same. For Greece and Turkey in particular, if the Aegean warms up and that drives tourists away, it's a similar cost to both of their economies, right? It's not something that one will benefit over the other. So the challenges are the same for the region. And to a certain extent, countries may feel and have traditionally felt that they can protect their own citizens by being stronger or having bigger armies, or I don't know, like stronger economies, what have you. But faced with climate change, this is no longer an option for our civilization, let alone, countries, individual countries. So we need to approach some of the easier to coordinate on issues with a feeling of common fate in a way, right? A perception of we have a joint fate here to address this. So, and if we all want to move towards energy transition and carbon neutrality, we'd better coordinate our efforts, as the environmentalists have been telling us for decades now, in order to make that happen. So, and you have actually seen that in the Eastern Mediterranean, between countries like Egypt and Israel, how they have cooperated to take advantage of the energy opportunities in their countries. And it can be expanded. I mean, I think Greece and Cyprus, with the trilateral partnerships in the region, have expanded this cooperation and build on traditional good ties with the region to expand on this key aspect of, I think this will be something that, especially your generation, you know, like the students coming out of university will be facing for the whole of your lives. I mean, I think this is the major issue, geopolitical, economic, that your generation will have to face and address and be impacted by it, but also hopefully shape it, right? So it's yeah, I think it's very much on all of us to try to avert and mitigate the climate change effects that we're seeing in front of us already.
I believe obviously these issues are universal, and they are both bilateral, but also the citizens, we need to pressure the government to work in a universal kind of ways to be able to, because doing it individually or in individual countries is not going to help, because what happens, we all share the same air, we all share the same economy, we all share the same energy supply in some way or another. So it's very important to convince the elected officials. In a democracy, it works the only way. That's the only way it works. You need to convince the governing body that we elected to start working together and come up with a strategic plan and to educate both the citizens and the economy and the CEOs and corporations of the economy that they are just as responsible, and they need to come up with ideas both in energy and also in educating the people to save our climate. And I know, Katerina, I met you in New York a few years back at the Hellenic Initiative, and I think you in a newspaper, you should really, I haven't read any of your papers, the Καθημερινή, is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah, and maybe you should set up a column on a continuous basis. What I did a couple of years ago, I talked to the mayor of Karistos to put a showcase of trash that we find in the sea, and put it there and put a sign there every time that this is your trash. You know, you'll find it there again if you don't pick it up and put it on a trash barrel. And so we all need to really be more active in saving the environment, because without the environment, without the climate, energy doesn't matter anymore, because we will not need it. Thank you very, very much for the wonderful.
Thank you, Mr. Danis. There was actually another question related to energy. I'll just ask it very briefly. It says, what can governments do to save or protect the environment, also to meet the challenges of renewable energy, and especially right now, take into consideration with the pandemic and the priorities of just pandemic policies?
I think around the world, from looking at best practices of energy use, there is a lot of knowledge and a lot of that we can apply on different areas. And thankfully in Greece, there have been some excellent studies about energy use and converting, using, the existing installations in areas like Athens or other big cities in Greece for, covering parts of it with the solar panels, like has been done in Germany. We have a lot of examples of different European models that have worked over the last years. So there are solutions, and I believe that the pandemic has helped a lot of people realize that, humans not being the dominant species of the planet, as many falsely perceived until recently, we have to really realize, and, take action for the environment, because we rely on it. Our survival and quality of life also relies on that. So for the needs of for the issues of energy and the ways in which we can stop being dependent on fossil fuels, there is the knowledge, the technology. It's just fascinating if you observe the technology that is out every year, and the efficiency of the different devices that are available, and the lower cost that exists. And again, I will emphasize local level, you know, business level, village level, city level. It can make a huge difference for a country like Greece, where apart from the large few cities, there is so many areas that are sparsely inhabited, and they can be easily shift into renewables with a quite low cost of investment. So there is a technology, there is a knowledge, there's not a political will, and that's what we are missing. Adding on to the previous question, Maria, that we mentioned about the conflicting interest and risks, the only thing I need to emphasize is the risk we face every day in the Greek seas for a large shipping accident. I don't think we realize, you know, and that was something that in a different universe, Greece and Turkey would be able to work very closely to address, because if there is a large shipping accident, the consequences can be detrimental for both countries, both the economy and the tourism and the public health. We have seen how the Baltic countries did overcome their political differences and join together to address shipping risk. And this is probably the most alarming problem that we don't realize, we don't have it high up in the agenda, but it should, you know, years ago with the previous political leadership in Turkey, there was an ongoing dialogue. Now everything is paused for obvious reasons, but the problem still exists and it's going to happen. And I have to share with you that, you know, every morning I wake up and I look for a potential accident. Every morning, every message we get from our shipping advisors, we are worried that this is going to be the end. So we don't have a lot of luxury of time. We've been extremely fortunate until now. But if there was one topic with which we should have cooperated with Turkey to join forces to address a potential risk, is that of a shipping accident. And if we cannot address it with Turkey right now, we should improve our internal policy and mechanisms in place for that.
Great. There's just one more final question from the Q&A. How is Turkey's factory waste polluting the Aegean?
The factory waste, obviously there is a lot of industry on the other side of the Aegean, which is a key problem. There is a lot of waste from both sides of the Aegean that are ending up in our shores. Something that our director tends to say is that, you know, in the Aegean we used to exchange civilization and goods, now we exchange plastic and waste, and that's a sad phase that we are currently in. It is a problem, but I think the urban waste from both sides of the Aegean are the key problem right now, rather than the industrial. Of course, the algal blooms, the massive algal blooms that were in the area of Konstantinoupoli and the Marmarasi over the last year was not caused by industrial waste, was caused by urban waste and agricultural runoffs. So we have to realize that the pressure given to both sides of the Aegean is strong, but obviously on the side of Turkey, because of the large population, because of the number of people and the small coastline, the pressure is many times stronger, and it's a problem affecting mainly them. But we possibly got a taste this year that this also affects Greece. You know, it's all the algal bloom that was very severe affected islands like Limnos and further, and it's going to only get worse with the effects of the increased temperature that we're facing over the last years and expecting for the years to come.
Great, thank you for that. So it is time, we're out of time. So I would like to thank all the speakers. Thank you to Dr. Anastasia Milu and Ms. Katrina Soko, sorry if I'm mispronouncing it, and Mr. George Danis. I would like to remind everyone that tomorrow morning, we're gonna have a presentation with Ambassador Ram Abiram on the Eastern Mediterranean through Energy, Water, Environment Nexus classes. That'll be 8 a.m. EST, which is 15 EET Greek time. So that is all. Thank you again for the wonderful presentation, and thanks to our guests and audience for your questions.